All right, everybody, so welcome back to another episode of Colton Posey Fishing. Today we're going to be talking about a subject that you really need to pay attention to, and that is the fall turnover, okay? Now, there's a lot of misconceptions and some things that a lot of people are wrong about when it comes to the turnover, and some things that I was wrong about in the past about the fall turnover. So, there's some stuff I want to bring to your attention, some stuff you may know, some stuff you may not know, so on and so forth. But either way, if that interests you, stay tuned because this is something you don't want to miss. So jumping into it, the fall turnover, what exactly is this? So you will notice on your lake, there will be a thermocline or river system, whatever you fish, but there will be a thermocline. If you're not familiar with what the thermocline is, I got a picture that I'm gonna pull up on the video. But that thermocline dictates a low oxygen level, okay? And what happens is down there where that low oxygen is, that is really cool water, okay? So, your surface temps, like on your graph, it may say like 70, 75, 80, whatever the case may be, depending on where you're at in the country. But under that thermocline is cooler water. Like one of my home lakes, Lewis Smith Lake, like around that 50-foot depth in that lake, it always stays like 55 degrees. Like it's super cool water. So, I thought that'd be like a good reference for you guys. But what happens is those surface temps start to cool off, and that cooler water starts creeping its way up, and it expands at a certain point, typically around 50 to 55 degrees, somewhere in there. I didn't go to college for all this mess, but, I've talked to some real educated people on this stuff, trying to get a feel for what exactly is the turnover, because throughout my whole life, I've always had expectations of what the turnover is, and I've always heard, different stories about, the thermocline and stuff like that during the turnover. But there's a few things that you can observe to understand that this is happening. One of the main things is like I tell y'all, when you're summer fishing, pay attention to that thermocline. So when you get to the lake and you got your units on, look and see where that thermocline is. It may be, I'm gonna throw out a number, 25 foot. Well, within that 25-foot range, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, you come back, you put your boat in the water, and you look and you say, wow, that thermocline's at 18 foot. So that is a sign that it's coming up, and you can kind of follow that pattern as the weather starts to cool down. So, now maybe you're getting around at 60 degrees at night, and, the high during the day is like 75. That surface temp is going to start cooling, and that lower or that bottom of the water column where it's already cool is going to start coming up, and it's going to mix at a certain point. When it mixes, that is when the turnover is complete, and it's usually towards the end of fall, right into winter, when we get those, really cool nights. But besides seeing it happen on your graph, one of the other things you'll be able to tell is you will smell it a lot of times. So a lot of different lakes and river systems, that stuff that's been down there at the very bottom, the sediment and stuff that's kind of been floating around, you will start to smell it. It's just got a musk smell to it that you can't miss. Now, the big question is, how does this affect you when you're out on the water bass fishing? Well, it depends on how you're targeting fish. If you're still stuck in that summertime rut where you're cranking these fish on points and you're spooning them on bridge columns and you're, doing all the typical finessey stuff for summer and all your reaction style baits, then this is probably going to affect you more than the guy who stays in the backs of the creeks and in the pockets and the sloughs and stuff like that. Now, why would this affect you if you're a deep water fisherman? Simply because as that thermocline goes up, the bass will not live below the thermocline. So what happens is they get pushed up shallower and shallower. Now, this does not mean that the fish will just rush the bank and be on the bank shallow. What this means is a lot of these fish that are living 25, 35, 45, 50 foot deep out off of these points, they're going to be pushed up. They're going to be in the shallower part of the water column. And I don't know necessarily if it stresses these fish out or what, but it definitely puts them in a position that they don't want to be in and in an area they don't want to be in because they're not really protected by anything. So my hypothesis is that these fish kind of get stressed out, maybe from boat traffic, all the fishing pressure throughout the summer and spring and all this stuff, and them being just in an area that they don't want to be necessarily, or in a hunting zone, okay? They're in a hunting zone that they don't want to be in. They become very, very difficult to catch. Now, this does not mean that you cannot catch those fish. But what this means is if you go out on a day and you realize, hey, something's going on, I'm not catching these same fish, but there's a lot of fish around here. They're just kind of suspended and separated. And that is another thing. These fish will separate. So being out in a real open area, if you're fishing a very, very large point, maybe it's 100 yards, that is a lot of surface area to cover. If those fish are spread out, you have nothing to identify besides, you know, like your sonar or anything like that, which can still be very, very difficult. And just because you find them with your sonar doesn't mean you're going to get those fish to bite. Now, another thing, if you didn't watch my last video, make sure to check that video out. I talk about how difficult it can be to catch these fish this time of year because they are so honed in on what they're eating. They are feeding, they are wanting to feed up for winter. They want to get fat and get healthy, but in between that and winter, you have that little funk in between that where, you know, right before they start feeding really good, you'll notice like, it's just like you can't really figure out what the fish are doing. It's typically because they're spread out. They've been schooled up all year and now they've kind of spread out. So how can you eliminate the issue of targeting fish offshore and then start easing back up into that shallow water pattern? One of the main things that I'm typically going to do, I'm going to search. That is going to be one of the biggest things you can do is cover a lot of water. Now this can be very, very difficult because a lot of times, especially if you're on a grass lake, just any lake or river system that has a lot of vegetation on it, like lily pads, willow grass, milfoil, all that stuff, it's going to start dying off. So sometimes those areas that you typically fish can be very unproductive because if the grass and all that stuff is dying, what does it try to do? It tries to stay alive. So if it's trying to stay alive, it's going to absorb more oxygen. Now, if it goes to absorb more oxygen, typically the fish are not going to stay in those areas because they want oxygen-rich water. If they didn't want oxygen-rich water, they would just move down and live below the thermocline, but they're not going to do that. So using your eyes and looking for vegetation that is still good and alive and green and fruitful, a lot of times can tell you and pinpoint areas to where these fish are going to go or where they're going to be. Now, another thing, docks. So you know, during the spring, late spring, stuff like that, I talk about fishing docks a lot because these fish, after they get done spawning, they're in that post-spawn funk. A lot of them like to get up under these docks and hang out. But I'm going to be focusing on floating docks more than anything. Why? With the algae still being on the buoys that's up under these docks and stuff, these shad come up and eat a lot of this. So there will typically be a lot of shad. And that's one of the key things I was telling you. Pay attention to what kind of shad is in your lake or in your river system and try to mimic it. Size, color, everything. And I promise you will get a lot more bites. So, to a conclusion, if you're an offshore fisherman and that bite starts slowing down because of the fall turnover, start moving to those shallower areas and focus on residential fish while the funk is going on. Number 2, eliminate a lot of water. Use moving baits, cover a ton of water. If you're flipping in grass or pads or anything like that, try to cover a lot of that area in a short amount of time. A lot of times those residential fish that are shallow, they're not going to be affected by this turnover near as much as the fish that are out deep because they're still in areas where they're used to being and hunting. But now once the turnover is complete, what happens is it all expands, okay? So that thermocline expands, it mixes in, and the water column from top basically to bottom, depending on how deep your lake is, but it's all going to be about the same temperature until another thermocline develops and then spring turnover and all that stuff. But you know, either way. So guys, if the video helped you at all, I would really appreciate a thumbs up. It helps out the channel a ton. Subscribe down below, hit that notification bell. Also comment if you have any questions, anything you want to add, or you just want to talk fishing. I love hearing from you guys. If you're more educated on the fall turnover than I am, or I didn't cover something properly or something like that, please drop a comment down below. I'll do some research on it. And you know, either way, we're all here to learn. That's the main thing. Either way, guys, I really appreciate it. I'll see you next time.